This is a third video for lecture 3. In the previous video, we learned demand and supply curves individually. However, classic economists theorize that interactions of buyers and sellers can lead to efficient allocated decisions. So, as you know, demand and supply curves are an analytical tool, and this video will explain how these curves interact each other in a free market. And then intersections of demand and supply curves is called market equilibrium. And then at that situation, the classic economics assumes that no one wants to change his or her behavior at that equilibrium, and it occurs only in a free market. So they believe that the price determined by interactions of buyers and sellers will be very efficient, and nobody needs to change their behaviors. In actuality, however, there can be many situations where the quantity demanded is not equal to the quantity supplied. We call that situation market disequilibrium. There are two types of market disequilibrium: excess demand and excess supply. In the excess demand, quantity demanded exceeds the quantity supplied at the specified price. On the other hand, excess supply, the quantity supplied is greater than quantity demanded. Under this market disequilibrium, efficient allocated decisions cannot be achieved. So in the next slide, we'll see how interactions of demand and supply can solve this market disequilibrium. This is a core part of classic economics. They theorize that self-interest behavior of sellers and buyers will lead to equilibrium. As we learned, this is the demand curve, which represents willingness of consumers to buy goods. And then this is a supply curve, which represents willingness to produce goods. And here is equilibrium. So in this graph, market equilibrium is achieved at price 3.30, and the quantity is also determined at 220. However, as I explained in the previous slide, we might have a situation of market disequilibrium. For instance, the quantity supplied might be greater than the quantity demanded. For instance, if the price above equilibrium, quantity is demanded here, and then quantity supplied is here. So this is graph shows that excess supply. According to classic economics, this market disequilibrium can be solved in a free market. Specifically, at this point, suppliers cannot sell this amount of their products 39, so they need to lower price to get rid of short stock. And then, since sellers lower the price, buyers buy more, and finally, market equilibrium is achieved in this free market. So let's see how a free market solves another type of market disequilibrium: excess demand. Self-interested behavior of sellers buyers will lead to equilibrium. In this graph, at the price of 3.30, quantity is determined at 220, and this is market equilibrium. However, if the price is lower than equilibrium, quantity is supplied is lower than quantity demanded. In other words, quantity demanded exceeds quantity supplied. So this is excess demand. This situation also can be solved by interactions of buyers and sellers, that is, invisible hand. So in this situation, while consumers demand this amount, suppliers only produce this amount. So here is a shortage of this good. So to solve shortage, suppliers try to produce more, and due to shortage, they can increase the price to get profits. And consumers demand less because suppliers increase the price. And finally, in this market equilibrium is achieved. While classic economists believe that free market finally can achieve the market equilibrium, the market equilibrium point cannot be stable because both demand and the supply curve shift in many cases. So firstly, let's see how equilibrium point shifts when demand curve shifts. So this is the equilibrium point. And when the demand curve shifts to the right, please remember demand curve shift when factors other than price change. For instance, the change of income or change of other goods price or consumers' expectation for that good. Also, it is very important to remember that shift of demand curve itself did not change the price, while it changed the quantity. However, when demand curve interacts with supply curve, it leads to, as a consequence, the price change. So when the demand curve shifts rightward, quantity increased. Also along the supply curve, price increases. As a consequence, market equilibrium shifts right and upward. So let's see an example of pork. Here is the first equilibrium point at the price of 3.3 and a quantity of 220. We assume that the price of a substitute good, beef, goes up by 60 cents and demand curve shifts rightward. Again, please note that shift of demand curve itself doesn't change the price while it increases the quantity. Because the shift of demand curve leads to the increase of quantity, excess demand occurs. Here there was a shortage. And in this situation, suppliers try to produce more to solve shortage, and then to get profits, they increase the price. And I will have another market equilibrium point. So next, let's see how equilibrium point shifts when supply curve rather than demand curve shifts. But the concept is the same as the case of demand curve. This is the first equilibrium point, and supply curve shifts because factors other than price change. Factors would be technology change or the change of price of other goods or consumers' expectation change. Here's an example of canned soda. The first equilibrium point is at the price of 3.3 and a quantity of 220. We assume that aluminum is a complementary good of canned soda because they are consumed together. And the price of aluminum increased by 25 cents. And the supply curve shifts leftward. And then this shifts leads to reduction of canned soda, and excess demand occurs. In other words, there is a shortage here. And then consumers accept higher price to get more canned soda, and then suppliers can produce more. And this second equilibrium point is achieved at leftward and upward. Finally, we'll see the most complicated case for shift of equilibrium point when both supply and demand curves shift. And then this is a market equilibrium point, and then in actuality, market conditions change over time, and then there are many factors which can shift both supply and demand curves. So it's unlikely that only supply or demand curve shift. In this example, to avoid complexity, we'll just assume that both supply and demand curve shifts rightward. And then these shifts lead to a slightly higher price and a much larger quantity. In general, when both supply and demand curves shift, changes in price and quantity depend on the amount each curve shifts and the shape of each curve. In your assignments, I don't ask you to graph the shift of equilibrium point when both supply and demand curves shift. Instead, I will ask you to graph the shift of equilibrium point when supply or demand curve shifts, because that is very complex. This is the last slide of this video. In this video, I explained that perfectly competitive markets are self-correcting. Even if free market faces market disequilibrium, such as excess supply, excess demand, invisible hand interaction of buyers and sellers can solve surplus or shortage of goods. In other words, invisible hand can lead to efficient allocative decisions. On the other hand, this supply and demand theory does not tell us whether all the people are happy at this market equilibrium point. So in the next video, I'll cover the justification of people's happiness at the market equilibrium point. So I'll see you in the next video.